My name is Jens Kaarsholm, Director of Design Technology at Bjarke Ingels Group in Copenhagen, and you're watching A Student's Perspective.
Perfect. Hi there, and thanks for tuning in to A Student's Perspective, the weekly series that connects students with designers, manufacturers, educators, industry professionals, and design media celebrities to hear their stories on just how they've gotten to where they are now. Through our conversations, we connect the past, present, and future of design to show just how much we can learn from each other to grow towards our fullest potential without prescribed limitations. Think of A Student's Perspective as a weekly design lecture series from the student's point of view. A Student's Perspective is a division of the nonprofit University Hall of Innovation, whose goals are to connect students with the design industry through design challenges and mentorship, and a collaboration with the Marywood University Interior Architecture Program in Scranton, Pennsylvania. All interviews can be found in their video format at www.astudentsperspective.tv. For more information or sponsorship inquiries, please contact universityhallofinnovation@gmail.com. Hi there, and thanks for coming back to another episode of A Student's Perspective. This is our special Season 10 of A Student's Perspective, and we are in the UK at the BIM in Leicester event at the Leicester School of Architecture. And so my name is Stephen.
My name is Misbah.
Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so my name is Jens Kaarsholm. I'm the Director of Design Technology at BIG, Bjarke Ingels Group in Copenhagen.
Okay.
And I'm going to be speaking here at the event later as well.
Excellent, excellent. To get us started, do you want to tell us maybe a little bit about your background and sort of what has led you to where you are now?
Sure. So I have a background in how to say, we have this education in Denmark called a construction architect, which is like somewhere in between being an actual architect and being an engineer. So it's sort of almost like, I think we would refer to it in the UK as an architectural technologist. It's roughly the same sort of education, maybe a little bit different, but more or less the same. So I was never allowed to sort of fully design, but I'm also not fully allowed to calculate, or at least not sign off on calculations. So I've always been stuck in that sort of middle ground between the two professions, you could say. But in school, we just learned a lot about drawings, detailing, technical solutions, and BIM for that matter. And that's sort of where, it led me in many ways on this sort of tech path that I've been pursuing.
Okay, all right. And you've worked at several different firms. You were just kind of explaining. Do you want to maybe walk us through that post-schooling and sort of how you've applied all of that at your different locations?
Yeah, sure. So I think the path I've been taking has been a little bit, not strange, but there has been a few sort of coincidences along the lines as well, and a few lucky moments. I sort of always knew that I wanted to do or work with BIM and 3D software, and actually in the beginning, before going into architecture, I wanted to be a game designer and a movie visual artist, but I didn't have the drawing talent to do these amazing drawings, so I sort of knew that I had to find something else, but I was really focused on the whole 3D aspect, 3D modeling, computer graphics, that whole side of things. And that was right around the same time when the construction industry in Denmark was shifting to BIM and to 3D modeling and to going away from 2D drawings. And then I was thinking, okay, maybe that's my call or my avenue to go for. So I was always, during the studies and also afterwards, I was completely focused on the BIM side of construction and not anything else. So I was not really looking for a job in the more traditional sort of ways of going. But I graduated right after the financial crisis, so there was very little jobs in Denmark at the time, and very little BIM jobs at that time. So I sort of, in the end, ended up finding a BIM job at a contractor, and then I sort of just hooked on to that immediately, even though it wasn't my dream job to start with. But it gave me an access point into the industry, and it sort of had the BIM aspect that I was looking for as well. Although it was for a contractor and I was sitting in their engineering department. But it gave me like looking back at it nowadays, it gave me a lot of knowledge and a lot of insights to construction that I would be very sad if I wouldn't have that in my toolkit these days. So it was actually totally worth it, you could say, to take those few years on the other side. But I just sort of always knew that I wanted to go into architecture somehow. I maybe shouldn't sit and say this out loud here, but like I've just always found architects more fun to be around somehow. I said it, but nothing bad against engineers or anything like that. It's just I just always found it more joyful or playful or colorful somehow.
You're amongst friends. It's okay.
So yeah. So after 2 years, I took a sort of a turn and found a job at a small architectural firm in Copenhagen, and stayed there for a year. And then one of the major coincidences happened, or like not coincidences, but at least one of these sort of lucky moments where a friend of mine, who's now a friend, but he wasn't a friend back then, but just a colleague that I work with, he had a twin brother who managed to land a job at Foster and Partners in London. And he came from the same education as myself. And then he phoned up his twin brother, who I was working with, and said that apparently his boss was looking for more like himself. And obviously he had a twin who had the exact same education, so he could literally say, I have someone who's literally a copy of myself that I could call and phone up. So they did that. And then the boss was like, but I don't need just one, I need 3 of you. And he was like, I cannot do 3, but I can try and find others similar. And then this guy came over to me, he's now a colleague of mine at Big, but he came over to me back then and sort of out loud in the office one day said like, would you want a job at Foster's? And I was like, lower your voice, but it sort of started resonating in my head. And then, I was only given a few days to make up my mind, and then I ended up just, going for it. And that, I think, for me, at least for my career, has been, that was a very fundamental moment, or like that was a huge shift going away from doing architecture in Copenhagen and in Denmark on a somewhat smaller scale to all of a sudden go to an international firm like Foster's and to be honest, I wasn't equipped fully when I made the jump to London back then. But sometimes, and I maybe that's also an advice for students, sometimes you just have to jump into deep waters, because you will typically float and follow the stream somehow. So yeah, that was sort of at least a very key moment in my career. And yeah, we ended up having sort of we were the early adopters of BIM, or we were I think I was the 5th or something like that BIM person to be hired at Foster's. So we literally had to help this whole implementation and get it out to all these different architects in this huge firm. And I back then had never encountered the complexity of the designs they do and stuff like that. So for me there was just a extremely steep learning curve of both landing in a new country and in a new firm, and then also the complexity that we had to deal with and so on, as well as the mindset of, it was a firm with a lot of architects that have been working in MicroStation for 20 years. So it was also a hard push in the beginning, because there was just a lot of people who didn't really want to go anywhere into something new. I happily admit that I was walking home a few evenings in the beginning, in the very first 2 or 3 weeks, thinking, should I just jump on a plane and go back home? Because it was really tough. Well, not tough, but more just like, scary somehow. So yeah, stayed 3 years at Foster's, and then after that I found a girlfriend in Copenhagen who managed to drag me home eventually, and then I came back to Copenhagen and thought I need to take a little bit of a break, so I joined a smaller architectural firm in Copenhagen. Not a small one actually, but it's still a fairly big one, but not the size of Foster's. But I was just still missing the complexity and the challenges, and then I had already previously been in talks with Big about a potential job there. So when they had an opening, I jumped onto it and actually ended up with a lot of the same tasks and stuff as I was doing at Foster's, because they also had to re-implement Revit and BIM in the office in Copenhagen. So it became almost like, I wouldn't say a copy-paste of what we did at Foster's, but it became I could utilize a lot of the same knowledge and skill sets and so on that I got at Foster's. So yeah, now I've been at Big for 5.5 years. So it's been a long journey now. It feels like a little bit, and then, but it's also really fun, and it's a great place to be. So I'm very, very happy how the whole thing sort of turned out and so forth. But
yeah, I think that sort of not meandering path, but the non-linear path, I think is always interesting, and kind of the two different experiences of saying, okay, going into Foster's and not knowing what you don't know yet, and kind of learning it on the fly, and that's when you encounter all those speed bumps and figure out, okay, how it allows you to then the next time be able to say, okay, I tried it this way. Now let's try it a different way. Let's look at the different people in a different light of what they're used to, and kind of it's a different way of knowing how to implement your knowledge and your experience, kind of moving into this new thing. So I think that's kind of comes back into, I'll bring it back into teaching, because we're constantly getting new students, new experiences, new classes all the time, and so we're taking that knowledge and we're figuring out how to disperse it to the next generation and whatnot. But so I think that's really interesting. And then going back and forth from sort of larger firms, smaller firms, larger firms, and experiencing the full gamut of it, but still trying to stay within that same kind of lane of implementing BIM and bringing that into a new kind of format. Yeah. So as a student, how does anything kind of resonate with you?
It's just quite interesting, because I always thought that the typical route is the route to get into the industry, but after hearing what you had to say about your route and like your journey, it shows that there's like other ways to be an architect and other ways to be a designer. You don't have to stick with the traditional way.
Yeah, and I will say that during my studies, I was, as I said earlier, I was super focused on BIM as the main thing. So I mean, I obviously completed the study, so I did all the other stuff I had to do and so on. But like, I always had this very sort of strong passion for 3D technology, BIM, and the likes. And some of my teachers back then actually doubted a little bit whether it was a feasible way to go. Like, some of them were saying, like, by the end of the studies, like, you should go out and take a traditional job to start with. Like, go out and do the normal thing for a few years, and then you can revert to a more BIM-focused title or job or career at a later stage. But maybe go out and learn the basics, and then you can go on. And I think that is a good advice to a certain degree. But at the same time, I also, if there's something you really feel passionate about, and that's really the stuff that gives you sort of fuel and energy and sort of drives you, I think you shouldn't try and sort of constrain that or limit that somehow. Like, you should just sort of try and then find a place or find a company or a job or role where you can utilize that at full. So I think doing that from day one was, I think, looking back at it, I think the right thing to do. At least for me.
Do you think that advice was because of how you were looking at using BIM, or what do you think led to maybe some of that?
I think it was just, I graduated around 2012, and BIM was becoming a thing in Denmark at the time, and had been for a couple of years, but it was still not sort of a norm, or like, there were still a lot of practices that didn't have a BIM manager or a BIM coordinator, or those sort of titles didn't really exist much back then. So at least sort of looking back at it, at the time there weren't a solid career path for a 100% BIM person, at the time at least. Or at least there were very few of those positions. And I guess my teachers back then could just be afraid that I wouldn't be able to find a job if I was so narrowly focused on it being BIM.
Okay.
But
So not necessarily trusting that there was going to be that 5 years from now or something like that. Okay, understood. And here we are now.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it played out well, and obviously, BIM did become a bigger thing, which I already back then sort of was anticipating it would. So I was right in a way, but at the same time, they were also in their good right to be a little bit skeptical. So I'm not saying what they told me was wrong. It's just I ended up trusting my gut feeling.
That's an important thing.
Yeah,
That's definitely an important thing, especially for students. It's so very hard to do. I think I sometimes feel that it's unfair to even ask some of our younger students. It's like, okay, yeah, choose the thing that you want to do for the rest of your life. When you're 17, 18 years old, I mean, it's a tough buy-in.
Yeah.
So looking back at when you first started, you were thinking, you were loving sort of the movie aspect of things and storytelling and things.
Yes.
Have you been able to bring any of that back around?
I certainly have, and I don't know when it started. I've always been playing a lot of video games and computer games, and I was fortunate enough to have a dad who bought a PC back in the 90s, like way before many others would have a PC. So I've always been tinkering with computers and playing games and other things. And then during my high school time, I would do my physicist deliverables. I would deliver sometimes like 3D rendered images of how the different setups should look like in the physicist whatever
in the labs
doing. Yeah, in the
yeah.
labs, exactly. The labs stuff. So I was already tinkering with 3ds Max and 3D modeling around that time, which I guess is where it sparked my interest for the 3D side of things. And then after I graduated and after I sort of went into the whole BIM side of things, I've continued to have the interest for video games and movies and other things. So I've always been trying to tinker with when and how could you merge these sort of things. And I actually said to a good friend of mine when we graduated that the day sort of the AC industry and the movie and film industry game industry, will merge, or not that they will fully merge, but the day they will get closer to each other, or at least overlap to a certain degree. That's when it's going to get really interesting, which I believe we've already seen for the last couple of years now. That with the likes of Unreal Engine and Unity and other things things are now starting to click together, and it talks together, and you can do all these XR, VR, AR related things as well. The whole gamification of things is now possible at a point, or to a point where it maybe wasn't so possible at least in 2012. Mm-hmm. But I had a feeling already back then that it would come somehow. So I've also been tinkering with a few things myself. For instance, during COVID, I managed to we've been designing and building our new headquarter for the last 5 years. And during COVID, we're still not on site completely with the project yet, or we were, but not. It was not sort of fully erected at the time. But I had a 3D model, or the BIM model of it, and I had this idea that I could. I was trying to see if I could get it into Counter-Strike as a computer game, because during my studies I was always playing a little bit of Counter-Strike on the sideline, and then I would also sit and design our school projects in Counter-Strike, but not directly linked to the model or the BIM model. So I would sit and model a BIM model, and then in the afternoon or in the weekend I would model the same building in Counter-Strike, but not looking fully one-to-one. But then back then I always had this dream of it must be possible to somehow make a connection, so you can actually take the one-to-one BIM model and get it into Counter-Strike. And then during COVID, I had some, like many others, I had a lot of extra sort of spare time, and I sort of gave myself this task to try and crack the nut and figure out how to do it. And I managed to do that and made our headquarter as a Counter-Strike map that you could play. So we were having Counter-Strike tournaments in our future headquarter during COVID. So it was a great place to meet when we couldn't meet physically, And what's also interesting about that approach was also that, I did not scale the models up or down at any point. So like it's literally you could say the real world sitting one-to-one in a computer game, in the digital world. So for people that might not know it, a person in Counter-Strike is actually 180 in height. I didn't know that before going into it. I thought it was at a different scale, but it's actually more or less same scale as the real world. So the lines I used to draw the docks with came from the surveyor of the harbor of Copenhagen. So those are the actual lines of the harbor in Copenhagen that are now sitting inside Counter-Strike. So it's just one example of things I've been tinkering with, but and this is obviously not a very serious thing, but more as a little fun side project.
Yeah, and I think that's when some amazing things can happen. And I think what I've noticed throughout the years, I go a little bit farther back, but what used to be siloed, where movies were here and comics were here and video games were here, now they're merging, like you mentioned, and it's movies are looking to video games and video games are looking to movies, and they're trying to each become more like the other. And so I think once you have those two things or three things running parallel to each other and kind of influencing each other, that's when the next thing is going to arise. They all kind of merge together and form the love child that becomes like the ultimate part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It definitely opens up a lot of interesting workflows and ways of thinking about things and potential new avenues. And at Big right now, we're definitely looking a lot into sort of like what other things can we use some of these other tools for, and how can we potentially sort of merge certain things and I'm tinkering with creating the headquarter again in Fortnite, for instance, and we have a bunch of other somewhat crazy ideas on the table that could be fun to pursue at some point, and you never know when you hit something that could actually be a really good use case for a client.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's
Yeah, I was actually just teaching about sort of some Lego evolution and thinking about the Lego architecture kits that started because a fan started building them on his own, and then Lego found them and said, "Oh, wait, no, we could use these." So, there's a lot of those secondary applications to things that I think could be really interesting. There's got to be a lot of fans who would love to play Fortnite in an existing building or in.
The only thing obviously is that it opened, especially with the computer games, maybe Fortnite a little less, but at least with Counter-Strike, I ran into some issues around guns and would our employees like to sit in a building that people are able to run around and shoot people in on a digital version, and I made it as deliberately as a construction site, so it doesn't look fully as the finished built building. But there's obviously some things there you have to be mindful about.
There's some gray areas. Turn it into a tag game or something. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
But no, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, so you mentioned that you wanted to be a game designer, and now you're kind of going back to your roots because of the knowledge that you've accumulated over the years, because of the career path that you had and all the opportunities that you were given. Would you consider going back to digital design, given like all the softwares and like the BIM stuff that we have?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually think the answer is no. I have this weird idea that I'm probably just gonna be sort of like a rocket that eventually just not burns out or explodes because of, well, hopefully not because of stress or anything like that. But I have this idea of just like keep going as I do now. Then we can discuss the angle, but like I obviously just want to keep going and doing what I do, and I think for me it's really important to always have a goal or something to pursue or something to do, and never feel fully stuck where I am. But I'm also starting more and more to actually think that when I leave Big at some point, I might not leave for, we'll see, but I'm not going to sit here and close any doors per se. But I don't think I will leave to another architectural firm. I don't think I will venture into design. Actually, I've been joking a few times, and it's not even meant as a joke, but I actually do think that I would probably really like to do gardening and become a gardener.
That's a very different route.
Exactly, because I have something with plants, and I have something with that I'm really getting increasingly fed up sitting at a desk, being static. So I really want to, use my hands, do something, with my hands, and so I think it could definitely be, a possibility that in 10, 15 years that you'll find me out in the soil somewhere with my hands in the soil at least.
It's very fascinating that you mentioned that you want to do something with your hands, physically make things. Would you think that's like a downside to BIM because you're always on a screen and you're not really making physical models and not really...
Yeah, I think...
Would you think that's like a downside to
Or maybe it's not a downside per se, but at least it's definitely something I think a lot about. The fact that I'm constantly behind the screen, constantly in virtual meetings, or constantly... I mean, I obviously also see a lot of people physically in the office and at meetings, but like a lot of the time I spend is spent behind the screen. And then I also... Well, I actually gave a talk in London last year at Next Build, the conference, about this sort of rise of bureaucracy in our industry, and I really feel that that's also something that's killing me. That has to stop, and I'm doing a lot of different things, and I'm part of a number of committees and other things to try and at least slow it down a little bit, or do what I can. And I can't do much, in all honesty, but at least I do what I can to try and influence things. But I am getting increasingly fed up with the amount of requirements and stuff that we constantly have to deal with and do and so on. And then if you then combine that with the decreasing amount of time we have to actually do projects, that becomes a tricky thing. So I hope that's, I don't think it will change, but I hope it will change at some point to the better, because I don't think it's good for the industry or for anyone with the amount of constant requirements and crap we need to adhere to and follow and do, and yeah. So I think that's the only negative thing I would sort of put out there right now.
Yeah, well, I think thinking about the BIM versus gardening, everyone needs the duality of the situation where it's like, okay, my job, or I spend most of my time doing this, and so I need to balance that with the other side of things. And so I think it makes total sense. And
I guess those two can be tricky to combine. In a hybrid version, so
landscaping.
Yeah, it could be. But I definitely might go for something hybrid at some point, where it's part-time doing one thing and part-time doing something else. Could certainly be. We'll see. But yeah, to your initial question, I don't think I'll go back to designing or to do any sort of smaller scale architectural stuff.
You can move into Minecraft, because then you can farm in Minecraft, and you can combine everything all at the same time.
True.
Yeah, excellent. So.
But then that would be behind the screen, and he is
good point. Good point. Yes.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to use some sort of VR goggles that you're not really behind the screen, and you can. We'll figure it all out. So along that line, a little more seriously though. So from where you've been and what you've experienced and what you've seen, if we move forward 5-10 years, where do you see things going? What's a prediction if you had your crystal ball?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I would be wrong if I didn't mention the hype train of AI these days. And I'm sure AI will have a big impact on the stuff we do. I'm one of those that, and I might again be wrong in 10 years' time, but I'm one of those that at least don't see it as a doomsday thing. Like, there's been, every now and then there's a new paper coming out that says architects will be out of job in 10 years, or like this profession will be out of jobs within so much time. But I'm sure we will find ways to adapt, and I certainly, and especially within Big right now, we very much see AI as it has to be a tool that helps us, but it shouldn't be a tool that takes over the design process. So it has to be something that aids the design process and helps us, but it should not really be the one that drives the design idea or drives where we're going, because we don't want to become a mid-journey architecture firm per se. So, and I think, I think the AI will definitely have a big impact. I think we will also see a lot more of the now also with the Apple Vision Pro headset that came out the other day. I'm sure we will also see a lot more in the realms of XR and extended reality and I'm sure we will one day wear glasses that has all sorts of stuff on the inside and so on. They're probably not fully there yet, but I'm sure that's also going to be a thing with a daily overlay with the news maybe in front of your eyes, etc. So and I could see some interesting use cases for that within architecture as well. But yeah, I think I think we're definitely going more and more in a more sort of automated way where automation, AI, machine learning, will be the, maybe not the driver, but it will be having a huge impact on the way we do things. So
yeah, I think bringing it back to movies, as long as we can keep from the Terminator or things like that starting to happen, where it's like it just goes way too far down one road. But I think it's like anything new. It's going to have its period of being super shiny and new, and we think it only does one thing, but then once we really figure out how to use it, and I think we're in that shiny and new phase now, where we do the easiest thing possible with it. But I think
but also like an example, and I could be completely wrong, but like VR was quite hyped at some point, especially within architecture, but it hasn't really picked up.
Right.
Like certain practices use it more than others, but it has sort of, on average at least, doesn't seem like it has really picked up. Now with XR, AR, XR, it's getting more interesting, and also now with the headsets becoming higher quality, it might get a revival, even VR. But again, it was hyped and then it dropped. We had last year or the year before, the hype train was metaverse. Everything had to be metaverse and so on. We don't hear much about the metaverse anymore. There's surely a lot of people that still pursues that idea, and there's still firms and architects that are pursuing that thing as well. And I'm not saying it's going to go away, because it's now going to probably be, in a way, even more relevant in the realms of XR and VR coming back with the Apple Vision Pro, for instance. But I'm sure AI will also have it has its hype peak right now potentially, and then I'm sure it will flatten out. It will not go away surely, but something else will come along and be the next hype thing, and then AI will go in the background again and become a normal thing. That's at least how I would hope to think of it somehow.
So if I'm not wrong, your career just started when BIM wasn't really a thing, and then throughout your career you've seen like BIM becoming a normalized architectural way of doing things. And now you've kind of sort of experiencing the new AI wave. How would you kind of differentiate the reaction that people had going from traditional route to BIM and now from that to AI?
Good one. I think obviously BIM and AI is quite different in many ways. So I think they can obviously be a little bit hard to compare one-to-one in the way people react to them and see them and so on. I definitely feel that there's a lot of people that are maybe not afraid of AI, but they are still hesitant to embrace it. And that's in a way also similar to how people reacted to BIM in the first place. There was also a lot of hesitancy and we used to do this in AutoCAD or in MicroStation, so why should I do, or why can I not do this in Revit and the likes? So I'm sure AI will also need a couple of years to find its place and for people to get used to it and familiar with it and so on, like with anything. And I saw a funny meme actually on the train here this morning with a comparison between the old Apple devices, both the iPods and the iPhones, like the very early ones, where they were super, or at least the how to say, reviews back then of those devices were that they were overpriced and they were clunky and they were, you know, like yada yada yada. There was all sorts of negative things around them, and that's also at least some of the things that you see now with the Apple Vision Pro. That it's overpricey and that it's heavy or that it's this and that, but again, it's like it's the first one, and I'm sure we'll see a shift and it'll get normal, and before we know it, we all sit in an office with headsets on, and you don't need 2 monitors anymore because now you can have 8. You know, so I think with everything new, there's always going to be a period where people are sort of hesitant to embrace it, and then by the time they realize it's amazing, then they will all jump on it.
Yeah. So, okay, all of this talk about the future. Now we're going to wrap up by going to the past. And one of the questions that we always ask is if you could go back and give your student self a piece of advice based on what you know now, what do you think that might be?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it before as well, and I think, I mean, maybe two things. Like I would definitely go back and tell myself that I should stick to my gut feeling, as I did, but like that you know, because I was actually in doubt back then, and so on. So if I could go back and whisper something in my own ear, that would be probably just do it. And we have at Big, we have this saying that we typically say yes is more instead of less is more, or it comes from the less is more, but yes is more is sort of our mantra, and I think that's actually a very nice one about sort of, it's all about keeping this positive attitude, positive mindset, and see obstacles more as challenges rather than something that holds you back. And I think I probably would have gone back and told myself to just stick to that mindset, and I used to be an intern at Big, so I actually already knew about that mantra at the time when I was about to graduate, so I should just have told myself to just stick to the yes is more philosophy, because that's really, I think, a key one. And then I guess maybe more of an advice to myself would be, I probably should have done a little bit more in terms of coding. I'm not a very good coder at all right now, and my brain is also not very, equipped for coding somehow, but I probably should have spent a little bit more time on coding, or at least like visual programming and the likes of Dynamo and other tools than I had or have been doing in the past. Not that it matters a lot today, but like I have had situations in the last 10 years of projects where I knew that something could be done. I just didn't have the capabilities myself to actually do it, although I knew exactly the logic or how this could be possible or how this could be achieved. I just didn't have I couldn't play the keyboard of actually doing it, so I always had to go to someone and ask for help, which in the end gets really annoying or frustrating, that when you have you have thought the logic to the end somehow already. It's just about getting the thing put together somehow. So I think maybe having spent a little bit more time on that during the studies. But then this is a very specific thing. But yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think everything's worked out for you, even though your coding isn't so strong. But that's okay.
I can't complain at least. So I've been lucky on a few occasions, but yeah,
that's great.
It's also been a lot of. I maybe also should say that there has been some lucky moments, but I should also add that there's also been a lot of hard work.
Absolutely.
You don't get anywhere by sitting on your hands. You have to get up in the morning and you have to do your thing. And you have to continue even in days where it's not fun, or days when it's tough. It's the only way forward. So that should also just be added to the bigger conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you kind of work at this futuristic, I would say, big company. I mean, I am aware that you guys are building something on the moon, because I was here for the last BIM talk and it was mentioned then. Because it's like such a forefront of the technology and innovation, what's the one advice that you would give students to try and get their foot into? Because how you mentioned that you should have done coding more, and you should have learned that more.
Yeah.
What's something that we should learn more to enable to have a better chance in the future?
I think just like being open about software and being open about learning new tools and new things, I think is key. Having that sort of appetite for testing out things and playing with things, and when you see something on LinkedIn or social media, then give it a go, try it out. And as a student, you can typically get free licenses. So as a student, you almost have like this, endless possibility of testing everything. Where the moment you join a company, then you have to pay every time you want to test something. So I would really just encourage anyone to have an open, playful mindset to anything, and then there's a bunch of good influencers, I would call them these days, on social media, etc., that talks about software and technology and talks about a number of things, and also provides a lot of training material for young architects. A good colleague of mine who was actually supposed to be here. I'm actually sort of stepping in to speak on instead of him. He sadly left BIG recently, but a guy called Oliver Thomas, he's doing a lot of amazing training material for young architects and designers on a number of different tools and platforms and so on. And he also does just a number of talks and other things to help young individuals grow within, you could say, the tech side of architecture. So that would be a recommendation, for instance, to check him out.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So, okay, great.
No, that's excellent. Thank
Great.
you.
Great.
Well, yeah, thank you for taking time to share with us, and thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like, share, and leave a comment. And make sure to tune in next week as the conversation continues from a student's perspective. We hope you liked this discussion with the design industry from a student's perspective. Please like, share, and comment, and stay tuned for more inspiring conversations to come.